Hi, I'm Alicia.
And I'm Robin, and you're listening to Bowel Moments,
the podcast sharing real talk about the realities of IBD. Served on the rocks. This week, we talked to Barbara Cramer. Barbara is the mother of 2 children with Crohn's disease, one of which is Hannah Cramer, who you met in episode 13. We talked to Barbara about what it was like to deal with having 2 children with Crohn's disease who also had vastly different ways of dealing with it themselves. We talked to her about running a support group for other families living with Crohn's and ulcerative colitis. We talked to her about where she gets reliable education information. We talked to her about unsolicited advice and comments from people and how to be supportive to families who are dealing with Crohn's disease, and so much more. Enjoy. Cheers.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Bowel Moments. This is Robin.
Hey, guys. This is Alicia, and we are so excited to be joined by Barbara Cramer. Barbara, I'm excited for you to tell everybody why we're excited to talk to you in just a second, but we always start out with a very uninspiring question of what are you drinking?
Well, I am drinking a nice glass of California Red Blend wine, so that's kind of my go-to drink. So what are you guys drinking?
I found, you guys will be so excited. You know, Robin and I both lived in Texas. Barbara, you're down in Texas. I found a Nebbiolo Rosé from a Texas winery called Slate Theory, and it's really good. So guys, Texas wine industry up and coming. So I was pretty excited. What about you, Robin?
I am having just the Bloody Mary mixer. So I guess like a Bloody Mary mocktail. I'm still doing the no alcohol for the methotrexate.
Well, Robin, I want to commend you for following your doctor's orders. Good job.
I know that's really something I don't normally do. So I feel pretty proud of myself too.
Hence why I'm saying it. Well, Barbara, again, we are really, really excited to have you on. Now, second question for you is, what is your connection to the IBD community? What brought you here?
Well, I have 2 kids that both have Crohn's disease. So that is my connection, and it's a pretty big one when you got double duty, both kids. And that's why I came across you guys and the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation and all the resources out there. So I'm thrilled to be here and talk about Crohn's and support and how we can all help each other.
That's awesome. Those are all things we definitely want to talk about. But will you walk us a little bit through, because your daughter, Hannah, has already been on the show. So people should definitely go back and listen to Hannah's episode, because frankly, Hannah is just amazing. We love her. But talk us through their diagnosis journey. So who got diagnosed first? What was that like? Kind of how has this been for you as they have navigated their Crohn's disease in very different ways? I know you mentioned that before we hit record. So let's start there.
Sure. Well, my daughter Hannah was diagnosed when she was 17. So she was a junior in high school, and she had been having symptoms for a year or so, couldn't figure out anything, and just, really a lot of frustration there trying to get to the bottom of it, but finally did get a diagnosis. And then that was a huge relief to at least know what we were dealing with. So my son, he was 19 when he got diagnosed. He was away at college, out of state, just started telling me he thought he developed a dairy sensitivity, and we didn't really think anything of it. A light bulb did not go off. But, trying a few diet things and nothing really worked. He finally went to a doctor, a gastroenterologist, and when they were just doing his intake and saw that his sister had Crohn's, they were like, I don't know what we're talking about. We just need to do a colonoscopy. This is really likely that you have Crohn's disease. And that was a very new idea to us. It hadn't crossed our mind, just didn't know the statistics about siblings and close family members, with Crohn's, that it's very common. So that was his journey. That was a very, very different experience. He was out of state. Hannah, we went to all the doctor's appointments. She was still a minor. It was a very different story. And so just so many things along the way were polar opposites in how we had to handle things because of all of those circumstances. So it was a really, difficult time, but we had been through it. So we thought, okay, we know what we're doing with this, because we had been dealing with Crohn's already for a couple of years with Hannah. But I was just amazed at how different I needed to think, because Philip was so different than Hannah and how he was handling it and how much or not much he wanted to talk about it. And that was very different. And so just had to kind of adapt all over again and figure it out, which is what we did.
Did you have a family history of any GI disorders?
Not so much in our inner circle where we have second cousins that had Crohn's, but they said that wasn't a close enough link for it to consider it hereditary. But we do have a lot of relatives with arthritis and other autoimmune disorders that they say that could be the connection. But I have my own philosophy on that whole thing because I learned a lot from conferences that I went to once I was dealing with all this and I wanted to know more. And I learned a lot about the concept of antibiotics being given to young children. And my kids both were always having an ear infection, always having a sinus infection. And so as a working mom, I always wanted to get them on antibiotics and get it cleared up, And one of the conferences I learned that they did find ties to antibiotics and the whole gut flora in children and how that hinders their ability to deal with things like this. So I don't know. I think hereditary is probably not where this came from, although I know that's up for debate.
Well, I mean, with some of the autoimmune conditions, it's like it has to be the perfect storm of things. So it's like, it's not just genetics, it's genetics plus, like you said, maybe this, change in gut flora, in addition to like environmental factors or other things that kind of all have to come together to get in the right person in order for that to be a thing for them. So that, I mean, that very well could be. That's really interesting. Huh.
Yeah, I think you could have a lot of, circumstances, but not end up with Crohn's disease, and then you could be, total opposite where you don't really have very many of those variables. And so it was really interesting to hear that.
So when Hannah was diagnosed, since she was a minor, did you go to a pediatric GI, or because she was close to being an adult, did you end up going to an adult gastroenterologist? How did you make that choice?
Well, we didn't really have a choice because she was a minor. She wasn't, she was only able to be seen by a pediatric gastro. The adult gastroenterologist didn't want to have anything to do with it. And so we did go to a pediatric gastroenterologist. And then the concern was, what happens when she turns 18? Then is he going to still treat her? And so he assured us that he would, see her through college, at least, college age, as long as her case was, manageable and not anything where he would not feel comfortable treating her. So that was kind of where we started. And that was a really difficult thing for me because he was the kind of guy that he just kept talking directly to Hannah. And I was like, excuse me, I'm the mom, tell me. And, he would just look at me and say, no, this is her disease. I'm talking to her. And I remember being so frustrated with him about that. But in retrospect, it was like the best thing that could have happened because I think it really forced Hannah to embrace it and accept it and all those feelings that go along with that. It was kind of like he was just so direct about it that there was no other way it was going to be, So I really, always reflect on that and how much that was a big deal. But he stayed as her doctor, mostly through college. And I think when she was in college, she did switch doctors. It became really complicated with her living in another city and doing Remicade infusions. And she had started the infusions where we lived. And then we had to find an infusion center where her school was. And at first we weren't comfortable with her having an infusion in San Marcos. We lived in Plano. And so we had her come home and we did it on a Friday and she'd spend the weekend with us. And then, over time we got to see, how she feels after the infusion. And we decided, let's switch it to San Marcos. So there's a lot of different things that were really interesting with the age and the being a minor, and then once you turn 18, of course, the parents have no control as far as even talking to a nurse or talking to the insurance companies, and navigating that was really challenging because by that point she's away at college and she doesn't have time for like an insurance claim question or, it's like, so there was just a lot of moving parts and it was, pretty stressful at times.
I'm going to go back to the beginning and say, I'm so surprised that the adult doctor wouldn't see her at 17, just based on conversations that we've had with doctors that have been on the show and my personal experience. Was that a community GI or was it an IBD specialist?
I can't remember where we started. I think her pediatrician recommended a doctor. And honestly, I'm sorry, I don't remember.
No, I mean, I expect you to remember every single thing, Barbara, everything. I'm throwing that out there because I feel like it might have been a community GI over an IBD specialist. I feel like the doctors that we've talked to would definitely take a 17-year-old because they are so close to that transition to adulthood. But then I have adult children also, and it was hard for me to, I was going to say train them, but that's not the right word, to coach them to always put me down as being able to answer questions and talk to their doctors and be a responsible party. I'm like, they're not just going to let me do that anymore, guys. Y'all are 18, 19, 20, 21. You have to actually say it's okay for you to talk to my mom in order for me to take care of anything that you want me to take care of. So parents who are listening with children that age, start teaching them young.
Yeah, exactly. And that was kind of one of the things we had to learn. And, Hannah was probably more like 16 when she started having symptoms. So she wasn't as close on the edge of 18 as it sounded. But that was definitely a huge recommendation to any parents out there that are dealing with that kind of high school age, because, you don't want to be switching doctors as soon as they turn 18, and you want to be able to stay with your doctor if you're happy with your doctor. So that's a really personal decision, but those things are important to think about.
Yeah, that's a really tough one because, like you said, had she been closer to 18, the one thing that I know has come up in conversation with like pediatric GIs is also typically there's less drugs that are approved for children under 16 as there are for kids that are older than 16. And so at some point, like that transition, an adult GI has, especially one that specializes in inflammatory bowel disease, probably has a better understanding of how these newer medications work because they're not approved for kids. And so the pediatric GIs maybe are not getting that information as quickly, So that would be my only thing, is that's why I know I was kind of surprised that, especially if she would have been on the older side of, 17, that they wouldn't have just said, just go ahead and go see an adult gastroenterologist, because that door opens up for you when you get to be older as it relates to the types of treatments available to you. Since Hannah was still in high school, did you have to work with the school at all to do like a 504 plan?
We didn't do anything like that directly with the school. She was always very friendly with teachers and admin at the school, and she was heavily involved in things, so people knew who she was. And so if she needed to kind of ask a favor, it was not a stretch. They were glad to help her. And there wasn't too much of that went on. Definitely in college, we got accommodations. But in high school, I think we were still figuring it all out and didn't even know about that option. But I think it's a really important thing to know about, because no matter what your accommodation is, whether it's a bathroom break or needing extra time or whatever, there's, lots of things that can come up, or just having a rough morning and being late, things like that. It totally works in your favor. You've got to use all the resources that are available to you. And that's just a huge one. So definitely in college, we had to, kind of make that decision that it just made sense, even though you don't want everybody to know all your stuff. It just really was the right choice.
And we've mentioned it on the show. For those of you who haven't listened to previous episodes where we've talked about 504 plans, that is a plan that you can make with the school that allows for you to ask for accommodations for your child. Like Barbara said, for, stopping the clock during testing, or allowing for bathroom breaks more often, or being late every once in a while, or taking medication at school if you need to. And then in college, again, you can ask for that accommodation through the offices. But you're right. It's really important, because even if you're not symptomatic, you don't know when you might need it. And it's easier to have it in place. But definitely having that communication channel open with your professors and your teachers is a really great option as well. But having that to protect you is a good thing.
Do you mind if we switch gears a little bit? When I first started, it was 10 years after my diagnosis when I first started like talking about it and meeting other people. And one of the very first people that I met that was so passionate about advocating was a mom of 2 sons. And she ran the local support group. That's how I met her, for 25 years. Her boys were now men. And so she was like passing the baton, and, they were in their 30s and 40s at this point with children, and, she had grandchildren, and she was still running the support group. And I know that you run a support group, or have run. Could you talk to me a little bit about the decision to lead a support group and what that's been like for you and everything about it?
Sure. Well, first I want to say that, as a parent, when you come across this kind of news and you're going through the shock of it and, the acceptance of it, at some point, hopefully, a thought comes to you where you just think, hey, something good's got to come out of this somewhere down the road. And you don't really know what that is. But for me, it was the support group and leading the support group with Hannah. It was something that she really wanted to do. And she had a vision of it being for kids and her working with the kids and me working with the parents, just as a caregiver myself, and just kind of having a discussion, and her, working with the kids, things she either has learned from being a counselor at Camp Oasis or just, along the way, talking to people. It was something that was really important to her. It was never really on my radar, but it was something that she really wanted to do. And so I didn't really know if how do you get qualified for something like that. I just realized, I'm one of these parents. I'm one of the people that needs a support group too. And so I got so much out of being in the support group just from hearing from other parents and learning how other people cope and being able to share, ways that I cope with it. So it ended up really being that moment where I can see how something really positive came out of this terrible situation. And very, very, very thankful for that experience.
For those people that haven't been part of a support group, again, this has come up on the show about support groups and kind of people being concerned that they're going to go to a support group and it's just going to be a bunch of people, woe is meing, and that it's going to be perhaps more of a negative experience. And so I think there are sometimes this sort of misconception about support groups. So can you walk us through kind of maybe what a typical support group was like? What should people expect if they're going to walk in the door of a support group?
Sure. Well, first thing to remember is you're coming to a support group to get support, but you're also coming to give support. And so when there is somebody that's really needs the floor, I think it's important for them to have it and for everybody to be the listener that they need at that moment. So I can see why it would be scary for parents of young kids who might not want their kids to hear certain things as far as like expectations of what the future might be or details about surgeries or procedures and things. That is scary. And it was scary for me to hear that as well. But I think when you come to a support group, you're kind of looking for a reality check a little bit because you're freaking out and you need to kind of see what other people's freaking out looks like and how they deal with it, because that's what you're going to get out of it. I don't think that there were really any times in the support group where I cringed at what somebody was saying, thinking, oh God, people are going to freak out when they hear this. But I know that that's a concern. It's really just it's an open forum. It's a discussion, people sharing kind of just what their experience is. And it's not just like one person taking a turn and then the next person takes a turn. It's like each person's turn becomes a whole discussion with the group because things come up and everybody wants to share what they learned about that issue. And so you might be talking about, having trouble finding things that your kid will eat. And then you've got other parents jumping in with the things that they've tried or things that they've heard of or things that have been recommended to them. And it just opens the door. You just get a flood of information. And then it's really nice. You see the kids are hitting it off because they're talking with other kids. And then the parents are really having a private time where they can talk about their fears about it. So I highly, highly recommend it. And I would say, try it once. And if it's not for you, it's not for you. But I think that you'll leave there really glad that you went.
I'm glad you brought up finding a way to cope with your own fear as a parent for your child. I think that must be an incredibly difficult thing because it's happening to your child. Of course, you don't ever want anything to happen to your child. Gosh, how have you figured out how to make sure you're showing a brave face with your kids while still coping with sort of the fear, anxiety, sadness that goes along with your kids being diagnosed with, both of your children being diagnosed with inflammatory bowel disease? Do you have something you figured out, or is this just a chin up situation?
Well, for me personally, I think that I treated it like any other stressful situation, getting ready for the first day of school or, any other things in your kids' lives, their first sleepover, their first sleep away, stuff that you coach your kids through and you want them to know how much you're there for them. So you you kind of make a plan. So yeah, chin up for sure, because if they see me freak out, they're going to freak out, and I don't want that. So I was never, kind of secret about anything, like we talked to the doctor in front of the kids, in front of Hannah. We talked openly about it. I, would intervene if somebody started to go down a really scary road that I didn't think she might be needing to hear at that moment. But, the coping was really accepting, like, this is not happening to me. This is happening to them. And I'm part of it, but I need to bury my feelings a little bit because it's much more important to focus on their feelings. I'm watching the show. I'm in the audience. They're the star. And I think when you can get to that place, it gets easier.
Ugh, I'll take your word for it, because it does seem like, yeah, Robin is just kind of shaking her head. I think that's such a tough place, because of course you want to protect your child. And so I think getting to that place must have been a little hard won along the way. And hopefully having some other parents to talk to also gave you an outlet for the times when maybe you did need to say, you know what, this is really scary and I just need somebody else to hear it.
For sure. And I think, supporters need their own support, so it's kind of like, the caregiver has to always take care of themselves too, because you're not going to be in the mindset to be a good caregiver if you can't. So that's something you have to kind of figure out early on. And, I'm not the kind of person that goes to people with my feelings very easily. It's kind of not really my way. But, at that time, there was just, a lot that I had to navigate with my husband and figure out how to cope with it. And we did turn to our friends and our family, because you have to. And, not everybody says the right thing. And I've told Hannah this lots of times. People, they mean well when they say something that they think is a sympathetic comment. But sometimes what they think is a sympathetic comment is something that's really hard to swallow, like, you're so young, this shouldn't happen to you. That's not helpful.
Yeah.
Also agree. You're right. This shouldn't happen to me, but here we are.
Here we are.
Or I could never. And it's like, no, you could.
You actually could. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, it's not like,
or at least it's not. Yeah.
Yeah. I just always remember this time that I talked to a friend of mine who had lost her husband to brain cancer. And when I was telling her about Hannah having Crohn's, she just got real quiet and thought about it for a minute. And then she said, slapped her hand on the table, said, we can live with that. Okay. We can live with that. And it was like, you know what? That's where I'm at with this. We just are going to be where we are with it at that time. And when we get to another hurdle, we're going to be with that and figure that out. And we're just going to keep doing that forever. And this is not going away. And that's just the facts. And so
literally forever. We're just going to keep doing that literally forever.
Forever.
Yeah.
I'm switching gears on this again a little bit. You mentioned going to some education symposiums and things like that. Have you found, and a lot of times other organizations like the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation often do these types of educational events, or there's online opportunities. How have you discerned which are the reliable sources of information? Because the internet is a scary place and it's filled with lots of craziness. So when you were starting out this journey of figuring out, like, what is Crohn's disease? How is it affecting your family? How did you figure out where to go when you were looking for this information? What did you take away? Like, were the education symposiums a better place for you to find education versus the internet? What worked for you?
Well, I distinctly remember checking out at the doctor when you go to leave and schedule your next appointment after we got our diagnosis. And there was a flyer for Crohn's Walk on the counter. And it was a week away from that day. And Hannah picked it up and said, I want to make a team. I want to do this. And so we got this flyer, from Crohn's and Colitis Foundation, and found a walk, and we tie-dyed homemade little t-shirts that said Team Hannah and got ready for it. And some of our friends went to it. And so I think from that, we got the exposure to the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation, and that really became my go-to place. I'm not really into Googling all kinds of symptoms and reading weird responses from everybody on the planet. I just feel like that's not my thing.
That's fair.
And it's really interesting because one of the things that came up in the support group, we were going around the room talking, each parent was saying, what do you do to relax? What do you do for yourself to cope? How do you handle the stress? And my response was, a glass of wine and a bubble bath, like what else is there? And this other mom said, no, 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 I get on the internet and I read up, and she went and she talked about how she would go down these rabbit holes and find these chat conversations and find different Facebook groups. And she did all of it, and she did it for hours every day. And she said, that's how I cope with it, is to see what other people are saying about this, whether they're, legit or crazy. She was wanting to see what other people said. And that was how she coped. And I was floored. But anyway, a little segue. So really the Crohn's walk is what introduced us to the whole Crohn's community. And then we've done it almost every year since then. I've had a team the last few years, not so much, but that's been my go-to place. And so from that, we, looked into support groups and conferences and the Power of Two. I don't know if they still have something like that, but it was where, somebody mentored somebody else, somebody who had been through this recently mentored somebody who was going through it for the first time, whether it was an adult with another adult or a kid with another kid. So Hannah mentored some people and I mentored some people. And those kinds of things were just really helpful for me, because I felt like I'm doing something about this, even though it might not be directly finding a cure for my kid, but I felt like I was doing something about this. And if I wanted to put my energy into something that my kids were sucking their energy up from this every day, I wanted some of my energy to go towards it too. If there's something I can do, I felt like that's what I can do. So I, just tried to attend conferences when I could go to them, or do things online when I could listen in on a speaker, things like that. So that's how I found it to be helpful.
Speaking of like Power of Two program and support groups, because you were a support group leader for a long time and you did these mentoring things, what was the most common things that parents would have, like questions that parents would have when they talked to you or when they came into the support group? Kind of what was the most common topics that came up?
I want to know that too. That's a good question.
It is a good question. A lot of people came because they were getting flooded with information that some of it was misinformation and some of it was contradicted other information that they got elsewhere. And so it's kind of like, they just didn't know, like, oh, which diet should it be? Some people say this diet, some people say that diet, what's the right answer? And, the right answer is that every patient is different and there's a lot of options, and you just need to figure out which one's going to work for you. And if the first thing you try works, then you're super lucky, but it might not be until the 10th thing you've tried. So that was, I think, the biggest thing is people were just so overwhelmed with all this information and not knowing kind of where to start. And so, my encouragement was always pick a place to start, whichever seems most reasonable to you, because your kid the best. You're going to use your knowledge to benefit them. So what seems most reasonable to you, just start there, anywhere you are, and focus on the one thing. And you'll find that as you're navigating it all, the acceptance is starting to happen and your kids are starting to figure it out. And, it will come together and the sun will shine again. You will get back to the place you want to be. There's always going to be an underlying thing. Your kid has a disease, but none of the fears that I ever had, I should say, let me take that back. I never had the fear that my kids would not have a good life. I never, felt like this was hopeless. I always felt like, okay, we'll try that. No, I never heard of that, but okay, we can try that. I just always kept trying to move forward and not get too bogged down with being overwhelmed. You just can't stay there. It's just hard to stay there.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that's why a lot of people end up going to a support group, is just because they are so overwhelmed with the information. And it's, especially once you start researching and going down these rabbit holes, it becomes even more difficult to discern what information is the correct information. So I think it's really good advice to say, okay, you eat an elephant one bite at a time, take the bite and then see what happens and go to the next bite. But it's so difficult, especially when it's your kid. It's one thing if it's you and you're like, I get how I feel. I understand, like I'm willing to take more risks with myself perhaps. But when it's your kid, you don't understand their symptoms necessarily. You don't always know how they're feeling, especially if they're perhaps a Philip that is a little more private with their feelings. And then you have to kind of do more guesswork. And I don't know, to me, it was like taking a risk on somebody else's behalf feels like it's a harder thing to do as a parent, I would imagine.
That's true. That's very true. I think you have to go with your gut, you
Mhm.
know, and just trust yourself that, you know, you're doing your best, and you're gonna figure it out. You're gonna figure it out.
And you're not in it alone. You have your child's doctor, your child is part of this process as well. And so you have people it's not just you making the decision typically, and of course I wanted to make a really terrible Crohn's joke about not necessarily being able to trust your gut, but I won't make that joke.
You're so
These are facts.
funny.
These are facts. And this is why we're all in therapy. This is why.
Oh gosh. One thing I want to ask, your children were both diagnosed really in like that formative time of when you're starting to figure out like who you are in the world. You're starting to date a little bit more. Dating becomes a little more serious, that like you're making these kind of big life choices. Has their Crohn's disease changed the way that you have helped them navigate the world as they enter it and to become adults that choose careers and partners and dogs and homes at all? Or I guess you wouldn't necessarily know because both of them had Crohn's disease when you were helping them do that. So I don't know how to ask you that question without you saying, well, that's just the way it is now. But
right.
Well, I think that what comes to my mind when you were saying that is that, having Crohn's disease, that does not define who they are. And when they, think of themselves, that's just another fact about them, but it doesn't excuse them for making that choice. I mean, they don't get out of stuff because they have it. If you want to get into college, you got to, suck it up and do what you got to do, just like everybody else, because you can't just put Crohn's on the application and get your free ride because you have Crohn's. So, it doesn't excuse you from how you treat people or how you turn into an adult. And I think that was something that we always really just emphasized with our kids is that, you don't get to play the Crohn's card with us. So that's what I think when I think I answered your question. I'm not sure.
I think so. I mean, I think, yeah, part of your job as a parent is to help them understand when you can play the Crohn's card, because there are times when you can, like you need help with the school to be able to, have some stop the clock testing and things like that. That's the time to definitely play your Crohn's card. But I chuckle a little bit that like you can't play it at home because you guys know better. So I think, yeah, that makes sense.
Exactly.
You can also play the Crohn's card by boarding airplanes early, just as an FYI.
We only recently learned about the early boarding thing that you could ask to early board, that you need to be up front near the bathrooms or whatever. Yep. And so that would have been helpful to know a long time ago. Nobody told me that little tip.
Yeah. There's a lot of stuff like that I didn't realize, but I guess it does make sense that you can ask for these types of accommodations and kind of everything that's like a bit of a public space. So that makes sense for airlines. So, okay, we talked support group. We talked navigating adulthood with your children.
You asked what is like most common at support groups.
I'm shocked you didn't say like just everybody wants to know diets. I was waiting for diets and alternative medicine, frankly.
Yeah. That stuff comes up for sure.
Yeah.
That stuff comes up, but I think it's more of a general overwhelming feeling that people show up with, and they're kind of like, don't even know where to start.
Also, shout out to Hannah for wanting to start the support group, grabbing that flyer and wanting to form a team like a week. This is why we love Hannah. These are two of the reasons why we love Hannah.
I think Hannah's pretty much a go-getter, and I think that you can tell.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's like, it really helps her to do these things. It's like therapeutic for her in a way. So I'm not going to shoot that down. She needs to be talking about this. This is a big part of her life.
Yeah. Well, I think I'm curious how perhaps some of this has helped you, because I mean, my dad had multiple sclerosis. That's why I got involved in working with people with various types of chronic illnesses professionally, but also that's why I started volunteering with the MS Society because of his MS, because I can't do anything about his MS. That's his MS, and he's going to make his healthcare choices. I can certainly try to influence him. He's passed away now, so I can't influence him anymore. But at the time, I couldn't necessarily influence him. It was his disease. But these were things that I could do that could help other people like my family or other people like my dad in a roundabout way. And for me, that was my way of coping with his disease. And sounds like some of this was prompted by Hannah, but it sounded like also you had felt like it was kind of helped you feel like you had a little, maybe to me, it was maybe like a piece of control. Like I felt like I was part of something, but also I could control this thing about it.
Right. Because there's so little that you can control about it, that if there's one little part that you can, wrap your head around and run with, then that makes you feel like you accomplished something, because so much of it is a feeling of defeat, or a feeling of, it's just such a hard hit. It's a really hard hit, it's your kids, and it's a lot. So, I mean, I feel like overall how it's helped me in general be a nicer person is is just to accept, the people that mean well and are trying to be helpful or thoughtful. There's not like a guidebook, although there probably is on the internet, but there's not like a set of rules I don't know of like, what do you say to a person who's got this devastating news? How do you help them? And so people are helping how they think it's helpful. Yeah. And being on the receiving end of that, you're kind of forced to accept their kind words, what they mean as kind words. And even though it might not be what you need to hear at that moment, they mean well. And that's what I try to focus on.
That makes me curious if there were things that people said that were what you needed and that were helpful, that were kind things to say instead of like, I appreciate your thoughts.
I know the doctor was really supportive with, that this was going to be okay. And I think that was one of the things that really helped me the most was, just his experience with it, and hearing that, it's going to be a rough road, but we'll get through it, and just having people to talk to when you need that is just priceless. Yeah. To have that. So, just you'll be okay. It'll be okay. They'll be okay. That's, I think, what most people need to hear.
I don't know that there is a set of rules of what you should say, Barbara, but maybe we'll write it and we'll see what we can put together between us. I do feel like there's probably plenty of opinions on what you shouldn't say that are out there on the internet. And I think, again, it depends on the person too. Like what Hannah would want to hear might be entirely different than what Philip would want to hear. But yeah, my friend whose child had a chronic illness, like you said, it's, it was not always what they said. It was just how they were present for them to talk to. And so I think just maybe not saying anything and saying, I hear you and I'm sorry, or I hear you and that sounds hard.
Yes.
One thing, Hannah had went through a pretty rough time here.
That she shared with us. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts you'd want to reflect on or anything you'd want to say about that. Like, cause she seemed like she was doing really well there for a while. She was pretty stable for a while, wasn't she? And then she kind of hit this real rocky patch with surgeries and medical trauma and things that are associated with it. Do you want to talk about that?
Hannah had a bowel resection that was her second one. And shortly after, she developed some complications from it. And she ended up having to have additional surgery and coming out of that with an ostomy. And so, you talk about shocking things, and that's, most people's worst case scenario. I know for a lot of people that is. And, that was very, very scary to envision how we would react to that, to her face. How are we going to keep strong and be what the support she needs when we're so scared? Really, it's like the first, 10 seconds and you're over it. It's your kid and you just got to do what you got to do. So like all the other stuff that came our way, we just did what we had to do. And Hannah stayed with us, and my husband camped out upstairs and she camped out in the master bedroom with me. And I remember that first night, neither one of us really slept, because the first night she was home from the hospital, she hadn't really managed the ostomy too much herself in the hospital. They had so much help that it was the first time we were like on our own with it. And, she had a huge incision from the surgery, like couple weeks prior, and the ostomy was very close to that. So it was very tedious to keep everything clean and do what you needed to do. And we met with an ostomy nurse who ran through the drill with us of all the things. And I'm just thinking to myself, okay, I hope I can remember all this. And I hope Hannah's remembering all that, because it was a lot of information. But finally, that night, we just kind of came to the conclusion that the only solution really was to wrap her in saran wrap and put her in the kiddie pool, because there was just going to be crap everywhere. And that was like
Yeah.
We just had to like, this sucks, and what we just laugh it off because like this is like what we're dealing with. So we just kind of had to figure it out. A lot of trial and error.
Yeah.
I know it sounds cliche that, God doesn't give you anything that you can't handle, but I really believe that. And I think that ultimately, we all have a lot more strength than we think we do, because when the chips are down, you're going to step up.
But also you reached a limit. I think this is the limit, big guy. Like, this is the max. I'm pretty sure this is the max.
Yeah. And I don't know if I would say that, because I do feel like, every day is a new attempt at mastering what we're dealing with, but like, you just never know what's around the corner. And I never want to jinx it, but I hope, this good phase that we're in right now in our family lasts a long time, and everybody stays healthy. But, that might not be what's in the cards. So we'll just have to cross that bridge when we come to it. Or as my friend would say, jump off that bridge when we get there.
Hopefully you're wearing a bungee cord though.
Yeah.
And you come back
Exactly.
up when you need it. So, okay. So Hannah went back for a bowel resection. So, and of course they do the whole, like, there could be a chance that this happens. And then the doctor comes out to tell you how the surgery goes. And they're like, by the way, we had to do an ostomy. Is that how that happened?
No, she had the bowel resection.
Okay.
And then she lives in San Antonio. We live in
Mhm.
Austin. So she had the surgery here. Her surgeon is in Austin. So she stayed with us for a week or two after the surgery, just to, have mom and dad take care of her. And so she had been with us for 10 days after the bowel resection. And that's when she started to not feel well and thinking that something was wrong. And so it was kind of after the point where they normally would worry that there's something wrong.
Oh, interesting.
So yeah, usually, if you're going to have an infection or, other things that could happen, it would happen, within a few days or 5 days or so. Here we were 10 days out, and she knew something wasn't right, but she couldn't put her finger on it. And we paged the doctor. It was the weekend. We paged the doctor a few times. And finally that Monday, they didn't want us, they weren't saying come to the ER or anything. So they just said, go over to the lab and we'll do some blood work. And the blood work, just showed, she was septic, and
Oh gosh.
that, she needed to go to the ER right away. And that was the ER visit with an emergency surgery that turned into an emergency surgery and leaving with an ostomy.
Okay.
So there was, it had opened, and she, was having pain that was different than the normal pain or the surgery pain. But it was the first time she was going through that. So she really was giving her best guess, I don't feel right, but I don't know exactly what's wrong. And, finally they figured it out. And so that surgery was like a evening surgery, nighttime surgery, which, that means they need to do it right away. And then I stayed in the hospital Brett stayed with the surgery, and then I stayed in the hospital once she went back to the room and stayed there with her. So it was, just a lot of new stuff to figure out.
But like you said, it's a good thing that she listened to you, and she listened to her gut and said, something isn't right here. It's not the right type of pain. It's not the right type of feeling. I'm glad that you did, because that's super scary. And it sounds like not a normal reaction to surgery for most people. They tend to go through it a little better.
Exactly. And the surgeon, said he's never had this happen at this stage of the process, so it's like they were, we were paging them over the weekend and talking to them, but it wasn't, light bulb wasn't coming on, because this just wasn't part of the norm, and so, you really have to advocate for yourself when something doesn't seem right, or, you are not sure, then you've got to, be persistent. And so that's how that one played out.
Thank you so much for being so open with us, Barbara, and sharing your experience. But I am sorry to say it's time for us to ask you the last question. So what is the one thing that you want the IBD community to know?
Well, I hope the IBD community will know that you're not alone in this, and that there are lots of people to turn to and places to turn to. And somebody that might seem like a stranger is going to become your new best friend when you realize how much we all have in common and all of the things that we go through together. So you're not alone is the one thing I want to say to everybody out there.
I'm going to ask you a secondary follow-up to that. Is there any piece of advice specifically for parents, other than you are not alone? That is a very good one for parents as well. But is there any specific piece of advice for parents
Well, I think I might have said this earlier, is really just to trust your instinct and not be afraid to speak up. I've heard a lot of parents, tell me things that just sounded really funky that their doctor said, and they're like, not okay with this advice, and I want them to speak up for themselves if something doesn't seem right. There's a million doctors out there, and you got to find the one that's right for you and the right support group for you and the right people for you, and surround yourself with people that are going to help you through this. So if something or someone doesn't feel right to you, then I would trust that little voice inside.
I like that a lot. Yes, I agree with you.
I really like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's this, we've kind of joked that it's like choosing a romantic partner. Like, you do have to find the person that really works with you and that you trust. And so I think that's the case too for parents, of trying to find the doctor that you feel like is listening to you and has your and your child's best interests. So that's great advice. Thank you so much, Barbara. This was so fun to talk to you. And it was fun to get to know Hannah through you as well, since we know her through her story, but to kind of hear your side of it was really fun. So we so appreciate you coming on. So thank you to you. Thank you to everyone who listens to the show, and cheers.
Cheers, everybody.
Are you out of wine? Oh, no. Okay, good.
Just in time.
That's perfect.
Hi, this is Barbara. And if you enjoyed this episode, please rate, review, and share with a friend.